Hello. So this is an intro for the masterclass of Professor Matthias Rillig of how you can make your lab a better place as an early career scientist. And I'm recording this brief intro because I forgot to press record when we started. So you just missed this introduction about what I am, what is I focus and write, a brief intro about Professor Rillig, and the first slide he showed. So just quickly, in case you have never seen one of our master classes, I'm Ana Pineda and I was a scientist for over 15 years. And then a few years ago, I started this educational company, I Focus and Write, where I help scientists like probably you to have a more productive, creative, and happier academic life. And I do this through, of course, my courses, programs for individuals, but also for universities and research institutes, but also through a series of free activities like this masterclass with the guests that we do almost every month, or my own masterclasses that also I do every now and then, well, different things like a focused co-working session, or a blog where you can find different articles and also other type of free resources. So for this class, I hope you enjoyed. It was full of value. People loved it after the class because I thought it was a bit of a sensitive topic. After the class, we pause. On this occasion, you don't hear the comments of the attendees. In other classes, you might find that. And if you like it, I don't know, you might be listening to this in the podcast, or perhaps it's in the YouTube channel or on my website. And just for you to know, there is more classes like this, like one with the editor of Trends in Plant Science, Dr. Susanne Brink, or for example, with the Professor Julia Koricheva on how to do a meta-analysis, and many more. And I hope you enjoy it. If you enjoy it, please share it, share with your colleagues, share that they can start following I Focus and Write, and enjoying also these other resources. Now, about Professor Matthias Rillig. Well, he is, like I said, a professor on soil ecology and global change biology in Berlin. And the reason why I asked him to give us this class is not that, but the fact that he has an amazing YouTube channel, Life in Academia, where he shares all kind of tips, and also many of them are resources on how to live in this academic environment as a PhD, as a postdoc, even also as a early PI. And every time he publishes one of those videos and I see it on Twitter, I'm like, oh my God, again, one of these highly needed topics that is so relevant for many scientists. So if you don't know about that channel, please have a look, subscribe, because it's full of valuable information, and it just keeps coming. It keeps coming. So now with this, I'm gonna stop and the presentation started. Sorry if it's a bit abruptly, but I hope you understand. Thanks.
It's like an expert in the science of science, or I'm not a psychologist, nor am I an expert in human behavior. So I guess this is just my take on things. Now, from the very beginning, I should make clear that there are some things that you cannot change really, because this is not in your power. So for example, you cannot really change the general situation or the science system in whatever country you're in. That may be more or less optimal. Also, what you cannot really affect is the personality of your supervisor or your PI. While the guy may be, or the person may be anywhere on the gradient between a saint and an absolute jerk. And of course, both of them occur. Well, unfortunately, there's bad actors as well as good actors. And none of what I'm going to say now is going to really help you much with that. Right? If you have a lab that's run by sort of a bad actor, or a person that doesn't fundamentally care about the health of the lab in the way that I'm going to talk about, then pretty much none of what you do will make much of a difference, because there's such a bad setting in the very beginning. So, I mean, this is basically also a general disclaimer at the beginning that none of this is intended to let PIs off the hook in terms of their basic responsibility to foster a healthy lab culture. That's part of their job. But if they don't do that, then it's going to be very hard. And so this presentation doesn't really address this particular point directly. But, you know, if you have a PI that's basically a decent human being, and nobody is, of course, perfect, and nobody certainly is perfect all the time, and we all have all our little personality flaws. But if this person is basically a decent human being, there's a bunch of things that you can do that often people don't realize, and this is what this presentation is about. And as you will maybe hopefully see throughout this little presentation, is that many of these points take very little effort. And they're also not purely altruistic, but they also make things better for you, because many of these points are aimed at creating a better community for everybody overall. And that is a better community is a place where everybody is happier. And if you're happier, you're doing better and more creative science. So this is what this is basically about. And now they have these 10 points that I want to give you as the ones that stood out for me in like my experience that made the lab really a better place. One thing is this mindset of improving the lab. That is very, very useful to culture. I think some people also call it metacognition or thinking about thinking. And this has happened in the lab basically without my doing. This was very much bottoms up. In fact, I was not invited to these meetings, but there was a bunch of people in the lab that met fairly regularly, and they thought about collectively how the lab could be operating better. And so they were they came up with specific propositions. And then basically this little group of people that took an interest in how the lab operates, they then sent an emissary to me that basically presented what they had come up with on how to make the lab run better. And then I would basically always do it because the suggestions were super reasonable. And in the beginning, there was a bit of hesitation because folks were concerned if I viewed this as being interfering with the way I run this place. And this is, of course, where you need to be a bit sensitive to the personality of your PI. You know, I'm the kind of person that I'm more than happy to receive any input I can to make the place run better. And if you take the extra effort out of your day to take the time to go to these meetings and think about stuff in a systematic way, I would be stupid to ignore that or to not act on that afterwards. So I think this is maybe a bit more involved, but it is a result of the basic mindset of not accepting necessarily the things the way they are, but of thinking about how can they be done better. Give you just a little example. It is things like, for example, when somebody presented in lab meeting for just 5 minutes, and then afterwards they got a 30-minute Q&A session afterwards, they were pretty unhappy because there were too many questions for the little presentation. And so one of the suggestions was just to limit the Q&A session to 5 minutes. Another suggestion was also to not only allow people to sign up for our lab meeting for the full 45, or actually it's more like an hour-and-a-half session, which seems kind of intimidating, but people could also sign up for 15 minutes. That's, of course, all super easy changes, right? But it makes everything run better. It definitely improves the way this particular feature of the lab, maybe the lab meeting, works. So just as an example. Another thing that you can do is whenever you have learned a skill, you can share it with others in the form of, for example, organizing little workshops. This is, for example, when you have attended a workshop someplace, you learn the statistical method. People, when they come back in the lab, they then make a little session where they share what they have learned. That promotes an atmosphere of like this knowledge exchange. It fosters collaborations because you say, hey, I know how to do that. Maybe I can do this also for your project. And so there's always collaborations within the lab that results from that. Makes everything better. And for you, the advantage is that you may win collaborators. And you can also, in the end, add that skill to your CV, like you have done a workshop that people have attended. And now we actually made it sort of a requirement. If the lab pays for you to go someplace to attend a workshop, you then better come back and share what you've learned in the form of this little session. But it started basically as people were doing that because they just wanted to share what they have learned. Something that is a little lower in terms of the level of involvement is these co-working and co-learning sessions that people in the lab started, where there are smaller groups. We're a lab of about 40 to 60 people or so. It's actually an absurdly large place, but so we have these smaller groups within the lab that then could get together to work on a specific problem. So one problem was, for example, how do you measure soil hydraulics? And a bunch of people got together and they, divided up the task on what could we study, how could we fill this out, how could we measure that, and then they were working either together online or in person to figure this out together. And that was actually much nicer than if you were putzing around on your own. And what's even sort of lower level in terms of involvement are these co-working sessions, like co-writing sessions, which we also still do, sometimes also just online, where all you do is you agree on a certain time when you're going to be all writing on a current project, and then the cameras are either on or they are off, or people are in the same room. And there's very limited talking, but it's just the presence of this other person that has sort of an effect of increasing accountability. I even observed that myself. I actually didn't believe that. I thought this was just hocus pocus, but it actually, this really works. One time in one of my classes, when I ran out of stuff to talk about, I said okay, now let's now do a co-writing session. And just the fact that there was this camera on and other people were doing stuff, there was no talking, there was no interchange, just the presence of the virtual presence, even only in this case of other people, had this kind of disciplining effect that made this super productive. Right, and in the end, you can also figure out, I also only wrote 2 sentences, but so did other people as well. So it can also have the effect of consoling you, but it can also be motivating. So this is another thing you can do, little groups that just organize to work on something together. Something that you can also do, which happens to happen here all very well, is when a new person comes. This is always an awkward time for that person because often they come from a different country or at least from a different city, don't know anybody, can be a potentially lonely and scary time at first. And so it's very nice when there is a friendly face that sort of says, here's where you can get good coffees, or here's how this works, or basically to shows you around a little bit more, in addition to maybe the more professional onboarding that covers stuff like how you get your email account and things like that. Just somebody that just kind of leads you around and shows you the ropes. That makes a world of difference. It's very little effort. In the end, you win friends. And some of these connections that have been made actually last for quite a long time, because people are then so happy when others open up to them and show them around. So this onboarding, I think, is a great way how you can become involved to make the place better. Of course, helping other with experiments. We had recently had a group of 4 PhD students enter the lab at the same time. And what they've done is take this to a whole nother level. I mean, we've always had these cry for help, like I need help with my harvest, or I need help with my setup, or I need help with sorting biomass or washing out roots or whatever have you. But these people have sort of tackled experiments that would have been impossible for any one single human to really do. But they got together in this little team, and they're setting every year, they said, they pledged, and they're doing it really now the second time around. Every year they said, in addition to their own PhD projects, they will set one epic experiment up amongst themselves as a group. And so they can achieve, of course, a lot more than if they just did it on their own. I mean, this is something that I have always encouraged. Like, I encourage collaboration. When people come in, I always say, like, I want you to work on your project, but I also want you to collaborate as much as possible with other people in the lab. And these people basically were the first to take this really to the next level of saying, we have made a firm commitment that the four of us, every year, we will set up one joint epic large experiment and just help each other out with that. So helping others with experiment rather than letting them struggle on their own is certainly an excellent way how you can improve your lab. Now, lab meetings are super important to me. They are sort of my top priority. We have 2 lab meetings every week, each 1.5 hours. So we meet actually quite a lot. And this takes a lot of my time, for which I basically get no credit so far. But this has been, I've been doing this for 15 years, more or less. And I think this is one of the best things that we do in my lab. And also there is always directly published papers coming out of directly these meetings that we write, basically based on the content of these meetings. So basically the message is these lab meetings are wonderful forums for exchange, for finding collaboration, for generating ideas, for becoming creative. They're also difficult to do really well. I would admit that they're very sensitive ecosystems that are perturbed by the least thing, like somebody talking too much or somebody saying things that are not nice. And so I will always be rather ruthless in my intervention if I see this happening. So I think that they're difficult to do well. And how you can help that as a student or a postdoc is simply to engage. It is really, really difficult to get, with the best of intentions, an interesting and exciting lab meeting going if people don't engage. That means, you know, read the paper, come prepared maybe with one question, or let yourself be stimulated by what is said by others and just become an active contributor. Especially as in this case, it will really positively feedback on you in terms of development of creative ideas and in terms of productivity. Now, if you're in a situation where you don't have a lab meeting, try to start one, because I think those are some of the best things that you can do. I mean, we have 2 separate lab meetings. One is a journal club and the other one is a data club. So in one case, we just discuss a paper. There are no presentations. It's just pure discussion of a paper every week. And the other meeting in also every week is data presentation, or presentation of new ideas for experiments or hypotheses or whatever. But of course, you can mix them all into one meeting as well. And maybe if your group is where you're in currently is small, then you can also get together with other people that have similar interests. This is what I did in my previous position in Montana. There were a bunch of microbial ecology labs, and together we were quite a bit of critical mass. And so those were fun meetings to have as well. So I think, yeah, everybody should have that experience, I think, within the lab environment to contribute to this lab meetings. Contributing to social events is, of course, also one way how you can improve community and how the lab works overall. This can take all kinds of different forms. You know, some people can sing. So we always have excellent things going on in some of our amazing Christmas parties where people bring like food from their country. So you can have, you know, like sausage with sushi and hummus and all kinds of other interesting combinations of food. Yeah, or you can think of games or things to play or creative little word association games or, you know, karaoke, whatever. But if you have, you know, if you have a little bit of input into how these events play out and the organization of them, or how you fill them and make them fun, that can also go a long way to creating a very good lab community where people also can sometimes talk about things other than work, for example. Yeah, so we've had a lot of contributions happen in the lab by people that are sort of more tech geeks and that took an interest in how we, for example, can improve some of the lab operations. For example, this is how we started using Slack. I think using Slack was like one of the biggest, most positive thing that has ever happened because, yeah, I think we average about 10,000 messages per month on Slack. So we are very, very interactive. And there's tons of files sent around all the time with tons of channels, and everything goes basically over Slack. And this all started by somebody having heard of Slack and suggesting that we try it out, and then we did. And so there's been a couple of examples like that where people have developed little tools or apps, and then we try them out and they can improve things, the way we interact, the way we are being creative, the way we interact as a group and whatnot. Also, I think it is a good sign at some level to be familiar with how the lab operates. Like, for example, things are being ordered, for example, from a supplier. They don't just magically appear on the lab shelves. And so, anything like that, if you take a bit of an interest in how this place runs, then you develop like a sensitivity for what you might be able to do. There are little things that make the whole place run smoother. Like if you take the last lab notebook out of the cupboard, then maybe, notify somebody so they can be reordered and things like that. People have also developed, have suggested ways how we do things more environmentally friendly. This is fine. There's currently a little subgroup that's concerned with how we could maybe replace some of the immense amounts of plastics we use in the lab with other items. And this collectively improves things for everyone, and also including you. So this is also something that you can contribute, like if you are more tech-oriented and you are on these internet fora where they discuss the latest apps and things, or just take a general interest in how that lab really runs behind the curtains. Now, also one important thing, and this is sort of a not very happy topic, but there is a lot of mental health issues. I think it's not a secret in academia, especially among PhD students. And so I think while it's not your job to look out for the mental health and to treat people, in no way is this your job, but I think if you just have a bit of a well, if you care a little bit how somebody maybe feels, then sometimes it helps a lot if people have somebody to talk to, and maybe you could encourage them to, check with the PI or something. We've had a lot of these issues during the COVID pandemic, as many other labs have had as well. And I think when things went really wrong, it was when this looking out for each other mechanism kind of failed. And so that's just very important to, I think, just be aware of that it is a very important thing to do, that you look out how people are doing generally in your group, because a PI may be not aware of changes in subtle changes in behavior, but you may be if you know a person relatively well. Yeah, and then the last point I wanted to make is being open. I think being open is a very important trait for lab culture. And I'll give you this one example. The reason I have these paintbrushes here is that we have artists in residence in our lab. We host them fairly regularly. We've hosted quite a few of them. This was also at some point completely new to me, but I'm generally a curious kind of person, and I always want to try something once. And well, this was a source of ideas, actually, for us. We took inspiration from that interaction. There's now research projects running on exactly that inspiration that happened during one of those artists' residence visits, with a postdoc working on it now and working on a grant proposal. So I think this was very much worth it for us. But it did happen because people were open. And so what did that mean? For example, when one of those artists in residence came in the door in the morning and wanted to go to her office, she said, like, I didn't get to my office until 2 p.m. because every time I was in the hallway, somebody took me and showed me their stuff that they're currently working on. And so there was just this general openness in the lab and willingness to engage with something new and unusual. And these are just little things, but they change completely the feeling of a place. Huh? So I mean, if it had just been me, it would have been, well, nothing. Huh? I mean, it would have been just the interaction with me and that artist, which could have been fun for the both of us. But I think it made it so much more of an experience for the artists, but then also for the people in the lab, because they were open to this new experience and wanted to engage with it. And subsequently, a whole lot of people, postdocs and PhD students, actually got involved with this local art laboratory, where they, run sessions, give talks, and so on and so forth. So this has really evolved into quite something for quite a lot of people in the lab, more than I would have ever thought. But it only happened because people were sort of generally open to this experience and then were willing to engage. Right, so I want to finish up with basically just saying what this means in a nutshell. It means making a better and healthier community of people, is what most of these, when you think about it, most of these points are all about. They're all about improving interactions, making it more than the sum of the parts. And that requires, by definition, pretty much everybody. This is not something that just a PI can do by her or himself. It needs sort of the engaged contribution of the variety of people in the lab. Now, what's also important to realize is that it contributes to resilience. So a better community makes the lab more resilient. A better community increases productivity and creativity, including yours. And a more resilient lab also leads to greater productivity in times when things are not going well. And we've certainly had our fair share, I think, of things not going well. We don't think about these when you go about your daily life, but we've had pandemics, there's, catastrophes, fires, outages, all kinds of calamities can befall you. Energy crises. I think it was definitely a big part of how overall the lab dealt reasonably well with things like pandemic, that there was already a pretty good sense of community with regular meetings, with routines, with communication channels open, that helped also the lab being resilient in the face of these adverse circumstances. Right, if you want to read up on all that, this is both written up as papers, the 10 simple rules here, a 10 simple rule article in PLOS Computational Biology that were basically, this was an article written based on the YouTube video. And then the other point was 10 simple rules for increased lab resilience that I didn't go through. I just alluded to in the end, but there's some of the points that do overlap, some others of course don't. But this was also published in PLOS Computational Biology, and they're both open access, and you should find them reasonably easily in the 10 simple rules collection in that journal. So I hope you found this useful. Maybe you can pick out some of these. I should also add that you don't need to do all 10 things or whatever. No, you can just, focus on some that that resonate with you, that you find interesting for yourself and you find reasonable. But I think that if everybody in a lab chips in this particular way, it makes it all so much more fun and so much better for everybody, and also more productive and more creative. And I'd also, of course, be interested, as I mentioned, in your thoughts and your insights. And with that, I think I have just about talked 30 minutes and I'm stopping here.
Thank you, Matthias. Thanks so much. And sorry, I completely forgot to start recording just for people to see if they can watch a replay. But also we didn't talk about this, so we will see what we do with that. Because I think this can be a bit sensitive for some people today. And now, if you don't mind, I will stop recording, so then the questions can stay just between those that we are here. And yeah, go ahead. So I'm gonna stop now.